The United States Constitution is a charter of limited government. Limited government under the Constitution is one of Potomac Tea Party's core values. The stories you are about to hear show what happens when government oversteps its bounds and assumes unlimited powers.
Most Americans today tend to think of private property simply as a home, the place where the family resides, store their belongings, and find shelter and safety from the elements. It's where you live. It's yours because you pay the mortgage and the taxes. Most people don't give property ownership much more thought than that. But there was a time when property ownership was considered to be much more. Property and the ability to own and control it was life itself. The great economist John Locke, whose writings and ideas had a major influence on our nation's founders, believed that life and liberty are secure only so long as the right of property is secure. John Locke advocated that if property rights did not exist, then the incentive to develop and improve property would be destroyed. Private property ownership, Locke argued, brought stability and wealth to individuals, leading to a prosperous society of man. From the very beginning, the United States was guided by the idea of private property ownership. It was written into our governing documents: property and freedom. One cannot live without the other. John Adams argued, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. In today's America, private property is quickly being destroyed across the nation. And note the growing lawlessness. The fear of climate change has become the excuse for government to dictate how every strip of land will be used. Have you ever wondered why these green forces focus so hard on the environment? That's because the environment does not recognize political boundaries. The environment crosses rivers, fields, and mountains, all of which cross our nation's borders, state borders, county borders, city borders, and the boundary lines of your yard. That fact has given massive new power to those forces that seek to change our way of life and our system of government. If you're determined to protect property rights, then you need to start with a good definition of what private property is. Too many think it just means a place where you pay to store your stuff. Here is a definition that was written by a Washington State Supreme Court Justice named Richard B. Sanders. He said, quote, "Property in a thing consists not merely of its ownership and possession, but in the unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Anything which destroys any of the elements of property to that extent destroys the property itself. The substantial value of property lies in its use. If the right of use be denied, the value of the property is annihilated, and ownership is rendered a barren right." We keep trying to defend liberty. Today, we need to take the offense. I think we can do that by taking that definition of private property as our banner and start demanding our rights.
Hey folks, Hal Shurtleff from Camp Constitution. Happy birthday, America. I'm going to discuss the lawsuit, Shurtleff v. Boston, concerning the Christian flag and the city of Boston. So it was in July of 17 that I petitioned the city to fly the Christian flag to commemorate Constitution Day and Boston's rich Christian history. It was denied. And the letter I received, I should say email, said it's a separation of church and state. That was the official response from the city. I knew I had a case, reached out to Liberty Counsel that evening, and the very next morning they responded. They took the case, and they issued, they wanted to have an injunction against the city. We lost that. The case itself was filed in July of 18, and we lost at the first two levels, the First District Court and also the First District Court of Appeals. In June of 21, we appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took the case in September, and September. So in January of 22, the Supreme Court heard oral argument, And during the oral argument, we were not allowed into the courtroom. They still had COVID protocols, but we heard the case across the street. You can find that as well as much information on our YouTube channel. It was on May 2nd, I got a call from one of our attorneys, and he said, Hal, we won the case 9-0. A few months later, we eventually raised the Christian flag on Boston City Hall Plaza. And I think it was in November, the city of Boston settled with Liberty Counsel to the tune of $2.1 million. And here's a couple of headline stories that appeared in the Boston Herald in the wake of the decision. And what made the decision really more than just a flag raising is that it set a precedent. It helped repeal what is known as the Lemon Test. To learn more about the case, I recommend Liberty Counsel, lc.org/flag. And with that, I want to wish you all again a happy birthday, America, and have a great time. And may we have many, many more happy July 4th or Independence Day birthdays. God bless.
Thank you all for the opportunity to take part in this annual celebration of freedom. When we think of freedom, we rightly start with political liberty, freedom from oppression and authoritarian rule. Some here know firsthand the terrors of a Marxist dictatorship. I myself had an uncle who spent 10 years in a Nazi concentration camp for his political ideas. Such histories remind us that political freedom can never be taken for granted. But my theme today is that freedom is much more than a shield against tyranny. It is the lifeblood of trust and a prosperous society. It's not absolute, but it's essential. It empowers people to build opportunity, create value, build a life of dignity. Economist Friedrich Hayek highlighted freedom's essential, immeasurable role. No government can match the distributed knowledge held by free individuals. A farmer knows his land, a shopkeeper knows her customers, an entrepreneur sees a need before anybody else. That local knowledge can only shape the world when people are free to act on it. More widely still, freedom fuels innovation. It turns trial and error into discovery. It allows societies to adapt, not through central plans, but through people working problems in real time. When governments assume they know more than individuals on how to lead lives, the result is too often stagnation, inefficiency, and harm. But freedom is not absolute. We have no license to harm others. Moreover, mutually agreed good rules, like traffic lights, for example, benefit everybody. Without protections of law, entrepreneurs won't risk their capital, workers won't build their excellence. Freedom thrives when protected by fair, transparent institutions. In the civic realm, freedom transforms rivalry into peaceful competition. Freedom of speech, the press, assembly lets ideas clash without violence. It is often messy, mistakes get made, but in free societies they can be corrected. A good example is New Zealand. During the mid-20th century, it ranked among the world's wealthiest nations. It drifted into stagnation through decades, departing from free market principles by overtaxation and regulation that was directed at controlling markets, prices, wages, capital flow, while favoring politically connected industries. As night follows day, New Zealand became relatively poorer, but in the 1980s it dramatically changed course through free, open debate and reform. By restoring freedom, it revived prosperity, rejoining the ranks of the wealthiest. Yes, freedom can slow decision-making, but that's the price for achieving legitimacy, trust, and lasting progress. So in short, freedom isn't the absence of order, it's the foundation of a better one marked by creativity, cooperation, and mutual respect. Let's defend it. Let's live it.
Our founding fathers established a limited government model in order to protect the people's natural rights. In the past 100 years, the federal government has grown well beyond its constitutional limits. The transgender issue shows how the Biden administration went beyond principles of limited government and invaded the province of the individual, Congress, and the 50 states. A couple of recent court cases demonstrate this. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 is a federal statute that prohibits sex discrimination in educational institutions receiving federal grants. President Biden's Department of Education expanded that definition of sex in Title IX in 2024 to include gender identity, allowing biological men to participate in women's sports and access women-only spaces which infringed on the privacy rights of individuals, in this case, female athletes. The changes also required students and teachers to refer to transgender students by the pronouns that correspond to their gender identity, infringing on the First Amendment rights of individuals. Some states objected and sued, and in January of this year, a federal district court struck down the change. The ruling in the state of Tennessee versus Cardona applies nationwide and returns Title IX to its 2020 regulations. Cardona illustrates the transgressions against the Congress and the individual. Congress established the definition of sex discrimination, and it was passed into law. The Biden administration tried to add to that definition. The executive branch was trying to make law, which is the function of Congress. In 2023, Tennessee passed a law banning harmful transgender procedures on minors. The ACLU and the Biden Department of Justice sued to overturn that law. This was the federal government infringing on the jurisdiction of state legislatures to make laws for those they represent. This term, in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court deemed in U.S. versus Scrimeti, the Tennessee law does not violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and that states have the right to pass laws protecting children in their states from irreversible transgender medical interventions. The Scrimeti case illustrates the transgression against the 50 states. The Supreme Court opinion stated that policy decisions are best left to state legislatures when the science is disputed. We must return to our constitutional roots of limited government or suffer the consequences of a bloated government and the loss of our God-given rights.
The U.S. Constitution promises limited government, but all kinds of constitutional lines were crossed during the COVID pandemic. The federal government and public health authorities were wrong about everything and lied repeatedly to the American people. They bent the public to their will, resulting in a long train of abuses no less egregious than those Thomas Jefferson listed in the Declaration of Independence. America left its constitutional moorings and drifted out of safe harbor until the notion of limited government was no longer in sight. Here are a few examples of just how wrong the government was in all things COVID. Almost 40,000 people died within 14 days of COVID vaccination, according to government records. Scientific studies and autopsy results strongly suggest the vaccines killed 3/4 of them. Vaccines that were rushed through and approved by the government without the usual safety studies and protocols. 30,000 people are dead because the government assumed unlimited powers and the people let them get away with it. The director of the CDC at the time falsely claimed COVID vaccines prevented transmission of the COVID virus to other people when they did not. Dr. Anthony Fauci could not name a single study showing cloth masks are effective against COVID, but governments imposed mask mandates anyway, despite there being no scientific evidence to justify them. Fauci and others cast aspersions on natural immunity arising from exposure to the COVID virus, despite studies showing natural immunity is superior to that afforded by the COVID vaccines. The CDC and FDA knew there were safety problems with COVID vaccines, but hid hundreds of safety signals and other information from the public. They pushed the vaccines while keeping the public in the dark, making it impossible for unsuspecting members of the public to give true informed consent to the risks of COVID vaccination. The CDC also falsely claimed it did not perform PRR statistical studies to monitor COVID vaccine safety, only to later admit that it did. In addition, the CDC redesignated post-vaccination cancer deaths as COVID deaths to cover up the astounding increases in the frequency and lethality of cancers following COVID vaccination. The CDC falsely claimed COVID was a leading cause of death among young people when it was not. School closures pushed by the CDC had devastating impacts on education and did not reduce COVID infection rates. The FDA told the public ivermectin is dangerous and even lethal in the FDA's infamous "You are not a horse" tweet, and gave the impression doctors were not allowed to prescribe it. However, the FDA had previously approved ivermectin for human use in 1996 and eventually had to admit doctors were free to prescribe ivermectin for COVID all along. Contrary to government propaganda, ivermectin has a good record for treating COVID. HHS conspired with British health authorities to keep adverse reactions to COVID vaccines secret, HHS records show. This whole record is shameful, but what did HHS do? The government spent up to $1 billion to push the phony narrative the vaccines are safe and effective in the media. Then Fauci, others in HHS, and the Biden White House, plus another 70 federal agencies, engaged in a massive, sprawling federal censorship enterprise, suppressing truthful information about COVID vaccines and other matters on social media in what a federal judge called the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. The assault on limited government did not stop there. Recently declassified records show the Biden administration labeled COVID vaccine critics as domestic, violent extremists, subject to investigation and censorship. This is how far the Biden regime was willing to take its phony COVID narratives, to abuse legal process to persecute anyone who dared question the official government line. To sum up, here are the constitutional lines that were crossed. The government unleashed vaccines it knew were unsafe on the public. It then hid vaccine safety information, making true informed consent impossible. This amounted to secret government in what is supposed to be a constitutional republic where we the people are sovereign. We the people were not given the right information to make our sovereign decisions or to elect representatives in line with our views. The government lied to the people about vaccine safety and masks, among other things. It bribed the press to push phony narratives. The government set itself up as the sole arbiter of the truth and declared other views false, confirming long-held fears about what happens when the government gets in the business of deciding what is true and what is not for everyone. The government shut people up and took away their free speech rights. The government labeled ordinary people who proclaimed the truth domestic terrorists and prepared to use legal process against them. This was at the same time the government was going after ordinary parents at school boards and ordinary Catholics for their religious beliefs. This is a long train of abuses, no less outrageous than those described in the Declaration of Independence. Back then, King George assumed unlimited power over the colonists. During COVID, federal agencies assumed a wide range of powers that were not rightfully theirs to claim. The government went where it was not supposed to go. It overreached. It invaded the province of the people and trampled the individual in the process, killing some 30,000 people with vaccines the government knew were unsafe. We let the government slip out of control during COVID. If we have any sense, we won't let it happen again.